Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IS English. In our today's video, we'll try to understand that is India only left with 6 days worth of crude oil? Well, I'm not claiming this. It is the government. In a statement made in Rajya Sabha yesterday, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas highlighted that India's strategic petroleum reserve is presently holding only about 64% of its total capacity. What is this 64% of its total capacity? It is holding around 3.37 million tons of crude oil. Now, this stock that India has is only able to cover 6 days worth of India's crude oil supplies. So, in this regard, in our today's video, we'll first understand what is the strategic petroleum reserve, or for that matter, where this idea of holding a significant chunk of crude oil as their reserves actually originated from. And then we'll try to understand why major oil consuming countries like India, how much of stocks they should ideally keep. And in this regard, we'll try to evaluate whether India stocks presently is able to see through the present crisis that have bestowed us because of the conflict going on in the Middle Eastern region. Okay, now the notes which I will be using in our today's session, in case if you want to download them, you can go to a particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live. And while you're at it, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also. Okay, so let us first understand what are strategic petroleum reserves. Now, the concept of maintaining a dedicated strategic reserves of crude oil actually originated in 1973, because in 1973 the world witnessed its first global oil crisis. Now, the reason of this global oil crisis back in 1973 was Yom Kippur War, which was fought between Arab nations and Israel. Now, Arab nations in that time, who were major oil producing countries, they decided to embargo oil supplies to all those countries who basically supported Israel in this war, basically all the Western industrialized countries. Now, this embargo, when it was imposed by major Arab countries who were also oil producing countries, it led to an unprecedented rise in the oil prices and also created scarcity of supply of crude oil, particularly in the Western hemisphere, and it exposed vulnerability of major industrial countries who happened also at that time to be the one of the biggest consumers of oil in the world. So this brought an idea into the question. Why not developed countries should make a mechanism to deal with such oil emergencies in the future, and hence we saw the birth of International Energy Agency. Now, International Energy Agency, it mandated for every of their member country to maintain such minimum strategic stocks of crude oil, which will allow them to neutralize such supply disruptions if they happen in the future. And as a result, IEA, it mandated the member countries to hold oil stocks which is worth at least 90 days of their net oil imports. Now, one thing you need to remember, this 90 days worth of oil stock that they will keep, it will include their strategic petroleum reserves as well as the commercial inventories that are stored in various different aspects of supply chain, from pipelines to tankers to petrol pumps, etc. So, sum total of petroleum reserves, a country should have at least 90 days worth of its import. This was mandated by IEA. So, this is where the idea of keeping a strategic petroleum reserve actually originated from. Now, let us understand how much is India's strategic petroleum reserve. Now, you need to understand, why do India need to maintain a reserves after all? Now, India is one of the world's largest consumer of crude oil. It is world's third largest consumer of crude oil, and it depends on imports to meet 88% of its domestic requirements. For example, in and around 2.5 to 2.7 million barrels per day worth of crude oil imports, India sources from one of the most volatile regions of the earth, that is the area of Middle East, and most of them are transmitted from Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is basically 50% of our country's present requirement of crude oil, but for a long period of time, this amounts to around 40% of India's total requirement of crude oil. Now, when India is importing huge amounts of crude oil, and that too from one of the most geopolitical volatile in the regions in the world, you need to deal with certain kinds of crisis which we are facing presently, and that is why this crisis presently and previous crises also have underscored the importance of India to maintain its own buffer stock of crude oil, and hence India also started to develop and hold strategic petroleum reserves. Now Indian government created a specific agency called as India Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited, which is a special purpose vehicle floated as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Oil Industry Development Board, which is responsible for constructing and managing these strategic petroleum reserves. Presently, India has 3 strategic petroleum reserves located in Visakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur. And the capacity of India's strategic petroleum reserve presently is 5.33 million metric tons of crude oil. Now, at the full capacity, this stocks of crude oil that India usually maintains is able to fulfill 9.5 days worth of India's crude oil requirement. And as I told you, presently we only hold about 3.4 million tons worth of crude oil, which is responsible or which will be enough only to ensure 6 days worth of supply of crude oil into India. Right now, you need to understand where are these strategic petroleum reserves located, and I have attached the map which will help you understand it. Padur, Mangalore, which are located in the state of Karnataka, and Visakhapatnam, which is located in the state of Andhra Pradesh, presently holds strategic petroleum reserves. This was phase 1 of strategic petroleum reserves. Now, as you can understand, these are not enough to meet India's economy's domestic requirement of oil. So government is planning to construct another strategic petroleum reserve in Padur, Karnataka, and a larger one in Chandikhol in Odisha. So this is the second phase of the strategic petroleum reserve. Now let us understand why has government planned to increase the capacity of India's strategic petroleum reserve. Now government in 2021 approved construction of 2 more commercial cum strategic petroleum reserves with a cumulative storage capacity of 6.5 million tons, which is more than the present capacity. And this, as I told you, will be located in Padur in Karnataka and Chandikhol in Odisha. Besides that, government is also looking at possibilities of setting up such similar petroleum reserves in Bikaner and Rajkot, which would be able to raise India's total strategic petroleum reserves by another 6 million tons. Although the decision on this projected strategic petroleum reserves are yet to be taken, but this is something in conception stage, and government is looking to prepare detailed feasibility reports of whether we can construct a strategic petroleum reserves at these locations or not. So what is the sum point of this discussion? That yes, India is storing some of the crude oil, 5.33 million metric tons worth of it, but this is not enough. So that is why we are going to construct more such strategic petroleum reserves in future. The second phase has already been approved, and the third phase, if it will happen, will see India's rise in the capacity of holding of the crude oil. Now, understanding that, what is India's current total national capacity of crude oil as well as petroleum products? Now you'll be a bit pleased to know that India presently holds 74 days worth of its oil requirements, which includes again strategic petroleum reserves as well as commercial stocks that the refiners like Indian Oil, Hindustan Petroleum, Bharat Petroleum, they themselves maintain. Although it might be lower than what IEA recommends, although India wants to become the full-fledged member of IEA, so it needs to scale up this a bit, but still it is very comfortable. So comfortable that it will ensure India's crude oil and fuel stocks up to 8 weeks, even if the crisis currently persists. Right? So India is safe in that regard. Now, what you need to understand that this actual reserves that I told you worth 74 days is a dynamic number. It can change every day based on the stocks and actual consumption of the crude oil requirement, and this number is not static. Now, with oil, which we are sourcing from non-West Asian countries as well as from other parts of the globe like Russia, it will ensure that stable volumes of crude oil are expected to reach India further, and therefore it will ease the crisis that India is facing currently with respect to the crude oil, LPG as well as the PNG. Now, there's also commercial angle to it. I told you the strategic angle. Why do you need to have a strategic petroleum reserve? Because it gives you a buffer in kinds of a situation which is happening right now in the Middle East. But there is also a commercial angle to it. Although India's storage capacity of crude oil is a bit limited, but it still gives ISPRL the opportunity to be a serious player as far as international oil markets is concerned. How can India be a serious player in this regard? Let me explain it to you. Now, suppose we have bought a crude oil at a very cheap price like we did in 2020 when crude oil's prices reduced due to COVID-19 restrictions, right? So suppose we have bought a cheap crude oil and stored them in our strategic petroleum reserves. And in future, if the prices of crude oil skyrocket, we would make a lot of money by selling these crude oil in the open market, and it will also help ease the prices of crude oil because increase in supplies of crude oil, right? So demand and supply equation will be taken care of if India holds a significant chunk of crude oil in its strategic petroleum reserves. Similarly, what you need to understand that the cost of maintaining these strategic petroleum reserves, if government were to use its budgetary resources, is very high. There are various estimates that for every 1 million metric ton worth of crude oil storage, the construction cost amounts to 2500 crore rupees, and not even counting the cost undertaken to purchase the crude oil to fill this strategic petroleum reserve. So in order to alleviate the stress on the government's budget, the government has allowed for commercialization of strategic petroleum reserves. What is commercialization? Let me tell you. Now, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, which is a state-owned oil company of UAE, it was given the permission to hold and use about 7,500,000 worths of ton of capacity of crude oil at the Mangaluru Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So we can let private companies, foreign companies, to keep their crude oil in India, but there is also a caveat that this crude oil, which is going to be stored in India's strategic petroleum reserve, in cases of emergency, it will be the government of India who will have the first right of refusal. So in cases of emergency, the government will have the first right to buy those crude oil, not any other private entity. And similarly, to alleviate the construction cost and the burden on the government awarded Mega Engineering and Infrastructure Limited the contract to build India's second phase worth of crude oil reserves, which is located in Padur, Karnataka, which is a key part of India's strategic petroleum reserves needs, right? So this is all for today's discussion. What did we discuss? That the idea of strategic petroleum reserves emerged from a global oil crisis in 1973. And as a result, many major oil consuming countries like the Western developed countries as well as India has started to keep a certain chunk of crude oil in their own strategic petroleum reserves. Now, IEA, it recommends its members that you need to keep about 90 days worth of your oil imports as a strategic buffer. And this combines both strategic petroleum reserves as well as the commercial supplies. And India presently, although it has only about 6 days worth of crude oil, but adding all the commercial stocks it has, India has a stable supply for about 74 days, which is good enough for 8 weeks in total, right? So India is in a comfortable position. There is no need to worry. And there is also commercial angle to it, which we discussed, as government has allowed private companies to store their crude oil in India's strategic petroleum reserves, provided they give government the first right to refusal in case of an oil emergency. So this is basically the summary of it, right? Now, before we move on to the practice question, there is a very important announcement. We are going to start a new batch from day after tomorrow onwards, that is 26th of March, and to take admissions in that, right now we are offering 60% off on all the courses. Now I'm going to teach economy in that particular batch. If you want to take admissions, go to our website and apply the code ATS Live. So you're gonna get 60% off and added discount by adding the code ATS Live. So this is the benefit of it. Now, before we end our today's discussion, there are two questions that I've curated specifically keeping in mind the UPSC requirement. Which of the following statements regarding India's strategic petroleum oil reserves right here are correct? Do let me know the answer of that. And there is another answer, which is basically a geography related question. Arrange the above existing and proposed strategic petroleum reserves located from north to south. So you have to align them north to south basis. So please tell me the correct answers to both of the questions in the comment section. And if you're waiting to download the notes, you can go to this particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live. So this is all from my side. Please have a very good night. We'll see each other again tomorrow. So have a good day.